All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back, welcome in, welcome one, welcome all. Hope you're having a wonderful day so far. My name is Michael. Welcome back to the stream. It is our typical time around 7 p.m. PST, and we are back streaming it up like usual. We are here. Um, Let me go ahead grab really quickly some links here for the chat really fast. Let me set that up. Cool. Hold on one second, my friends. All right. And then let me go back. Uh, Hold on one second, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me here. Setting this up. All right. And then let's go ahead and close that. Start up the Twitch. We got the Twitch going, guys. If you want to join on the Twitch and rather prefer to watch on Twitch, you can feel free to watch on there. I have the chat as well linked up here, so I'll be able to chat with you guys on Twitch as well. Um, Let me go ahead and get the YouTube chat synced up here. And there we go. We're all synced up and we're ready to go. Let's get this show on the road. We got one more hour of this lecture. It should be a good quick hour here. Let me go ahead and fill up my water bottle and grab a couple of cutie oranges because we're going to enjoy this hour, really enjoy learning the last little bits of Flask. It's kind of starting to click for me here. I've been thinking about it over these past few days. I think it was nice to take these lectures in chunks rather than try to, bust it out. That's what, pause in one day because now I have the opportunity to just reflect on the information in between sessions, but still being able to, get the information, kind of hit me again with it the next day to kind of reinforce. So honestly, this is kind of a pretty good strategy. I think I will often recommend to people is to watch the lectures in daily chunks. I think there's a lot of material in the lecture itself, and it's hard to remember and grasp it all. Um, when if you're trying to remember everything in 3 hours rather than three 1 hour segments over the course of 3 days, really helps to balance kind of that memory loss curve in terms of retention of information that we kind of have been talking about before on the channel. So you guys like that pause? I catch myself saying some suspect stuff sometimes, so I throw in the pause every once in a while. I think it's kind of funny. Hey, Choppy, welcome in. Looks like you guys beat Mahan today. He's a no-show for this morning early stream. We'll have to give him some crap when he comes in here a little bit later. If he'll probably come in, I bet you. So when Mahan joins in late, you'll have to give him some grief. But you guys beat him today. Hey, Choppy and Kay, keep it cool. Welcome. There is no little Mike. No little Mike. I have a younger brother. He joined the Discord and he'll chat every once in a while. Let me go ahead and fill up my water bottle and then grab some cutie oranges and we'll get this lecture watch along really rolling here. This last hour I'm excited for. Give me 1 minute here. Oh, I forgot my oranges. Shoot. All right, thank you guys for being patient with me there. We got that all filled up, ready to go. We did start the stream a little bit early, so you know, so I might have to stop at the 30-minute mark and take a bathroom break. But all right, let's go ahead and get this show on the road. What are you guys studying this evening when you're if you're joined here along with me? Are you guys watching the lecture here? Let's go ahead and let the chat know, or the Discord. Feel free to join the Discord, you guys. Great place to be. It's got a ton of awesome resources you can get access to for completely for free that I've handcrafted myself. I've written all of these, resources and notes here. No, not those, but just like the individual, weekly updates for this course and links to all my information and watch-alongs of live solving of the problem sets that we did on the lecture and on the course here. So on the stream rather. So it's a really great place to be. Let's go ahead and throw in the chat here. Not inverted binary tree. Let's hit everyone here. Let's say I am watching the last hour of week 9 lecture in CS50X 2025 on Flask. Come join. All right, and then let's go here. Let's copy that boy. Throw that in there. All right, let's get this show on the road. Let me throw in the old pods. All right, Smoking Noir, awesome. Let's get that computer going. Let's get studying here. All right, let's get the show on the road, guys. Oh, wow, Choppy. Dude, wow. Oh my gosh, we got back-to-back streams with a super chat. Oh my goodness. Choppy, thank you truly. I'm blushing out of my ears here. My cheeks are hurting from my smile. Thank you truly for the 5. You're honestly a beast. Thank you so much for jumping in the stream and hanging out with me here on the daily. I really trying my best to give you guys an authentic view and study session of what it's like just to hang out with a normal guy trying to learn this together, whether it kind of mimic an in-person approach as best as I can just through a online stream. So thank you guys so much for being here and for helping me out and truly with learning together. Without you guys also being here motivating me and helping me, this would have it have been a lot harder. I don't think I would have been able to do this every day if I didn't have you guys alongside me to talk to and ping questions off of and just network with. And that is so much value in itself that anything else is just cherry on the top. So thank you so much, Choppy. You're such a great guy. I really appreciate you joining here. Thank you, truly. Kicking off the stream hot today. Let's get this show going.
All right, so up until now, even though we've been building an application that's very specific to Frosh IMs, it's actually representative of a paradigm when it comes to web programming and software engineering more generally. In fact, up until now, what we've really been implementing is a couple of concepts. One is what we would generally know in software engineering is a controller. So app.py is representative of a type of program that you might call a controller. For exactly that reason, it's controlling everything about your application. It contains the so-called business logic for your application. Meanwhile, though, there is a part of the application that the user sees and interacts with, and that's generally known in some circles as a view. So everything in the templates folder really is a so-called view. But in that most recent example with the Frosh IMs, once we started writing and reading data to and from a database, we introduced a third piece of the puzzle, which is generally known as a model. And model refers to the database or some kind of storage that you're using to read and or write data. And collectively, these 3 ideas of model and view and controller are generally referred to as MVC, model, view, controller, and it just describes one type of architecture when it comes to implementing a web application or really other types of application, whereby when you sit down to design them, you don't just implement everything in one massive file, which we've kind of been doing throughout much of CS50, but rather you separate concerns. You put all of your templates, aka views, over here. You put all of your model-related code over here, and then you have a controller that's somehow orchestrating between those 2 concepts. It doesn't change anything we've yet done, but it does slap some industry standard labels on top of them. Speaking of industry, it turns out it's incredibly common on websites, of course, to log into them as your, like your Gmail account, for instance, if you use, or Office 365 or some other email service, or really any website nowadays for which you have a username and password and log in. And indeed, up until now, neither of the applications we wrote, the Hello World application or Frosh IMs, had any notion of individual users. There was no login, which means anyone who sits down at the keyboard could type in some input. What that means similarly is that anyone who's at the keyboard can see all of the information therein, including the form itself, the list of registrations, the confirmation pages, and that might not be ideal because if we really are implementing the idea of those paper-based forms back in the day, well, really only that resident advisor or proctor should have access to the forms once they're submitted. Everyone shouldn't be able to just change their URL to /registrants and be able to see something. Which is to say, if we did want to add the ability to log into a website so as to exercise finer-grained access control so that I can see this, you can see that, we need to somehow add more functionality to these applications, much like Google has added to their own Gmail page. Unfortunately, the way HTTP is designed is that every piece of information that goes between browser and server has to be sent all at once for the browser to know about it. And yet when the user then clicks on another link, ideally in some cases the server would like to remember, oh, wait a minute, this is the same user and I already logged them in before.
Okay,
you don't want to have the user to have to log in
about, like,
every time they click a link or every time they submit a form to prove to you that they are who they claim to be. In other words, you'd like to be able to remember that someone has already logged in. So for instance, in the real world, if you go into a club, an amusement park, or a bar, sometimes they put a little bracelet on you, or sometimes they stamp your hand. And that hand stamp is meant to confirm if you come and go through the same door, oh, we've already authenticated you. We've already checked who you are so that we don't have to pull out your ID and look at it again. So in fact, I actually have a little hand stamp here. And so if you imagine that here is my hand with no stamp on it being presented to get into some fun amusement park, once I've shown them my ticket or my ID, what they might very well do is, if not a bracelet, put a stamp on my hand like this here smiley face. And so long as I show that to the bouncer or the ticket taker again and again, they will remember that I have already authenticated myself by showing them my ticket or showing them my ID in the past. Now, it turns out that HTTP, funny enough, can implement exactly this same idea, albeit more technically. Recall that when using HTTP, you see a message like this in the browser being sent to the server, for instance. For instance, when you log into Gmail specifically, inside of that virtual envelope goes a post message, followed by / or some such route, followed by the version number of HTTP, and then maybe some reminder as to what host name is being posted to. Meanwhile, the server hopefully responds, as we saw last week, with HTTP 200, which is a status code meaning OK. But wait a minute, if we have already this mechanism whereby the browser can talk to the server and the server can talk to the browser, could we implement from the server to browser this notion of a hand stamp? Well, we can. We haven't dwelled on these too much, but recall that inside of that virtual envelope, such as one pictured here, is a HTTP header, one or more of those things. And in fact, every time I've pulled up developer tools, there's actually been a whole bunch. This is just a key value pair. So maybe if we could somehow implement this notion of a hand stamp as a key value pair, we could remember that someone has logged in. Moreover, we can remember who has logged in somehow as well. And in fact, the way that HTTP has browsers and servers do that is as follows. When you log into Gmail or really any website, what that server does in its response message to you is, unbeknownst to you really, is it stamps your hand. Specifically, it includes in the virtual envelope among all of those HTTP headers another key value pair, namely set-cookie, : and then some value. And while you could somewhat foolishly just put the user's email address, like setcookie : session equals mailin@harvard.edu. Generally, the value inside of that HTTP header is like a big random value, a big string of text and or numbers that somehow the server keeps track of and remembers that, okay, I gave David this big random number. I gave Yulia this big random number. So we don't all get the exact same smiley face hand stamp. But the next time the user from that same browser clicks a link, submits a form, unbeknownst to you, the browser sends another header in addition to the usual, namely a cookie header, : cookie colon, and then the exact same string, session equals value for instance. And session itself is kind of a term of art. Session refers to the concept of maintaining state between the browser and server, even though HTTP by design is really meant to be stateless. Once the browser icon stops spinning, you've gotten all the data you're going to get from the server. But so long as the browser knows that once it receives a cookie, send it back to the server, send it back to the server, include it in every subsequent virtual envelope, the server can remember that, oh, I've seen that smiling face before. I've seen that big random number before. That must be David. That must be Yulia. And so it's a very clever way of just reminding the server who you are. And to be clear, the cookie itself could be your email address. Heck, you could even use your password just to constantly remind the server, here's my username, here's my password. Here's my username, here's your password. But that's generally not a good idea, and you should not be doing that nowadays because it's all too easy potentially for the data to get intercepted. And certainly don't send usernames and passwords over the internet more often than you need to, just as a good principle. So with that said, if we have the ability to stamp the user's hand in this way and to remind the user what's there, what you're looking at indeed are cookies. And in fact, this class is so long already, it's a good thing we brought some snacks for today. So these here cookies, these are what cookies actually are. And all of us have probably heard about cookies in the context of the internet for some time, whereby cookies get saved on your computer from the servers that you actually visit. Well, what is a cookie? There's really no academic value to what I'm doing here, but what is a cookie in the context of the web? Well, it is just typically a big random value that's stored on your computer. And it doesn't have to be random. It can be, for instance, your username. It can be your email address. Hopefully it's not your password, but if you've ever checked that box that might remember your email address and auto-populate it, it may very well be the server that's reminding you of that same value. The reason that cookies get kind of a bad rap, though, is that there's a lot of cookies typically being stored on your browser from servers around the world. And a lot of those cookies are used to track you and me. Now, it stands to reason that if I've logged into a website, well, of course, the website's going to be able to track my behavior on that website because I literally told them who I am. But when the world of advertising, for instance, it turns out that even if you're not logged into a website, there are enough unique features to your computer and your browser and the way that you use it that servers can typically plant cookies on your computer, even without your logging in. And even though they don't know that I am David and that is Yulia, they do know that I'm the same user again and again. And they can effectively build a profile of who you are based on all of your clicking behavior. So if you recall last week when I first was demonstrating various features of HTML and the like, I was actually deliberately using incognito mode sometimes because I wanted to start with a fresh slate. And so among the things that incognito or private browsing mode typically does is it gives you a brand new empty cookie jar, so to speak. It clears the browser's memory just for that window that you've opened privately, and it makes sure that you have no cookies by default and you have no other settings by default being sent back and forth to the server, effectively ensuring that you're starting from scratch. But if you're using the same non-incognito or non-private tab again and again and again, you really are accumulating a lot of these cookies. And in fact, if you open up developer tools, you can see under the storage tab or thereabouts in other browsers all of the key value pairs that servers are storing on your computer. So with that said, let's use cookies not for evil, but for good, and to actually use them to remember that a user has logged into a website. And to do that, we're going to leverage a feature of Flask that is built on top of these cookies known as a session, which is, again, just some form of memory that keeps track of that, the fact that we have seen some user before. In effect, a session is the technical way to describe something like a shopping cart. Anytime you've bought something online or added something to your shopping cart, you could come back a few minutes, a few hours, a few days later, and depending on how the website is implemented, it can remember what is in your cart thanks to these cookies. Similarly, we can remember that you're logged in via these cookies using this here feature. So let me go into VS Code here, and in advance, during break, I went ahead and created the beginnings of a login-based application. If I type ls in my login directory here, we'll see app.py require.
Okay, so this is where we're going to make a new directory inside of our week 9 notes called login. We're going to create a app.py. We're going to create a templates. And we're going to create a requirements.txt, and then that gets put there. Okay, so now we have that.
Requirements.txt in a templates directory, inside of which, as before, is just index.html and layout.html.
Okay, so inside of our templates, we have index.html. We also have layout.html.
But let's go ahead and implement a website that now
knows
if I'm logged in or not, albeit simplistically. Let me go ahead and open up my index template in templates, and I'll close my terminal window, and in here,
Okay, so index, right, it's this. Layout.html. Okay, we're going to have this block body, and then end block, right? So this is just Jinja syntax for creating or extending from the layouts.html, like layout HTML within our templates, extending the header and all that information above the body, and then we'll have our block body section, and then we'll end the body via that insignia. So we'll insert our code found on index.html within here.
I'm going to use some Jinja syntax that we've seen before. If the current user has a name, well, then they're clearly logged in. So let's go ahead and say you are logged in as name, period. And if it's not the case that there's a name value, then let's go ahead and say you are not logged in, period. And I'm going to add an end if down here. So at the moment, I'm just assuming that name is a thing and that it actually exists. But I'm going to need to implement now that logic next. So let me go into my terminal window again, this time opening up my app.py, which isn't really doing much yet, and start to make a few changes. In addition to importing Flask and render template and request, I'm also going to import a feature called session. And then down here, I'm going to configure Flask to use sessions as follows. And this is the kind of thing you can copy paste from documentation or these here examples. But I'm going to say app.config, quote unquote, session permanent equals false, capital F for false in Python, and app.config, quote unquote, session type equals, quote unquote, file system in lowercase. This essentially enables the ability to store sessions. Put another way, this turns cookies on for this web application. It ensures that the cookies are not permanent in the sense that what cookies I'm using should disappear when the user quits their browser, ultimately. But I'm using, on the server, the file system, like the files and folders locally, to keep track of who is logged in. And then lastly, I'm going to say session, capital S, and specify app there too. And I'm going to import one other line that I forgot from Flask session, import session, capital S. Again, there's
Okay, so we got session type here. He's moving quick. And then we got session on app. So this will enable quote the session, which is the memory of users, right? Something along those lines. Okay, and then he does from Flask session import session, like so. Okay, let's continue on here. Hey, Darko Przewski, I appreciate you for joining. Przewski, appreciate you for joining me. Pause. Whoa, appreciate you for joining me. Thank you, dude. I appreciate you. What's going on? What you studying? You watching the CS50 lecture with me here? We're on the last hour of the week 9 lecture. So we're coming up on the close of the end of the course here. One more week after this. So I appreciate you guys for joining me. All it took was us just starting and looking at where we are now. So if you think that, this is something you want to do, follow a similar path to me and you'll be right along, finish the course within a few short weeks. It's really not too bad, and you can commit yourself to doing hard things too that you might not maybe think that you could do. So Carlos Salcedo, hey bro, what's up? Let's get it. Nine to code. Hey dude, what's going on? What chapter are you on in, in Python Crash Course? Huge pause. Unpaused. Yeah, we're paused more than this lecture right now. Hey Wing Hong, welcome back in. I appreciate you for joining me this evening. Welcome back. It's awesome to hear from you. I hope you're feeling well. All right, let's continue on.
There's some hoops to jump through here. I too have to check the documentation or my own examples to remember what. But in short, I'm importing Flask's support for sessions. I'm importing this session-specific library as well. I'm specifying these configuration options, and I'm now turning on sessions with this final line of code. Of course, for this to work, I actually need another requirement. So let me open up requirements.txt, which up until now we've not needed because we already put Flask in there. But I actually now want to use the Flask session library as well. Strictly speaking, you don't need to do this in CS50.dev because we've pre-installed it. But for a typical real-world application, we would need to tell the server that we indeed have another library and install it with pip. All right, so that's mostly copy-pastable boilerplate. Let's go ahead now and implement a route. So app.route, quote unquote, slash, for my default route, define a function called index, as before. And let's very simply return render template, quote unquote, index.html. And then that is it for now. Let me hide my terminal. Go back to my other browser tab, which still shows the previous application, FroshIMs, but so long as I run Flask run in this tab here, and go back to that tab and click reload, I should now see this new application. And indeed I do. It just says you are not logged in, because I haven't done anything related to logging in yet. Well, that's OK. How do I want to go about implementing this then instead? Well, let me propose that if we want the user to be able to log in, we need a form via which they can tell us who they are. So let me go back to VS Code. I'm going to go back to my second terminal window here, and I'm going to cd into my login folder to be in the same place, into my templates folder to be in that place, and I'm going to create one more template called login.html. Inside of login.html, I'm going to very carefully type extends, quote unquote, layout.html, close quote, %. Down here, I'm going to say block body, as always, and then end block down here. And then in here, I'm going to whip up a very simple form. So form action equals quote unquote /login. The idea being, in a moment, I will create a new login form. The method I'm going to use for logging in, for privacy's sake, is going to be quote unquote post. Then inside of this form, I'm going to have a text field where autocomplete is off, also for privacy's sake. Autofocus is on for convenience's sake. The name of this field is name for the user's name. The placeholder they'll see is quote unquote name. And the type of this field, to be clear, is text. For simplicity's sake, I'm not going to bother with a password. In fact, we'll see that in the next problem set. But for now, I'm just going to allow the user to log in just by telling us their name and no password. So I'm going to have a button, the type of which is submit. And then the label for that button shall be log in. How?
OK, let me catch up here. Jeez, he's quick. Just got like lost in the sauce there. Autocomplete equals quote off. Autofocus name for this input box is going to be quote name for the user's name, right? That's just giving the box a name so we can get some information from it. Placeholder, which is just the text that sits inside of it. By default, is just name to give the user some sort of cue, and type equals to, what did he say the type was? It's behind his head. Anybody know what he said the type was? So then the button type equals to quote submit, and then we have a name or just words on the button of login. So then we need some more Jinja syntax for the end block, like so. just like that. All right. I wanted to ask you, is it okay to ask ChatGPT for stuff that I don't know, or is that a bad practice? What I often suggest and what I put into my own studying and practice is that I will strictly specify it to not show me code. I strictly limit to the amount of actual lines of code that ChatGPT can send to show me. Now, of course, when you're learning new topics, it's best to try to understand them and break them down yourself. But it gets to a point when it's kind of you have to you have to in order to learn you have to have some sort of resource, whether it be a book. So yeah, you can either look something up and probably get a similar to answer, but ChatGPT is oftentimes just pulling from the internet anyways, so it's typically giving you answers like that are online. So and my experience that is, if you can just be careful to prompt it, to not show you code and to walk you through the steps rather than show you, gauge my current understanding before you begin. All of these little preliminary prompts, I'll feed it so it doesn't go on ahead of me, and then I'll use it to learn that way. Because it could also be, just quicker than a Google search, because it technically is just like a Google search that just filters down the answer for you. Now, you have to be able to also interpret that filter as correct or not. So the chat and the stream does help to, with that as well. But you can kind of also tell when it maybe doesn't know what it's talking about, because you can kind of test it a little bit, like prompt it further, like, well, what about this? And then it kind of will backtrack. So you can't trust it always in certain circumstances. So definitely take that with some, grain of salt. But just for the speed that you can get access to, those easy questions. Now, I will say that I will prompt it to show me some lines of code if I want to see like a simple example of like a loop or what this function does or something like that, just so I can actually see like the function in display, like in actual code. I think that's fine as well. But let me know what you guys' take on it as well. My stream is lagging a little bit here. Let me know if it's struggling on your guys' end. Let me know. I don't know. I've never used Claude before, Chili Millie. I've only used the Chat GPT almighty orb here. Is my stream lagging, guys? Or is it okay? Let me know. Hey, Sticky Steve, welcome back in. I appreciate you for joining me here. Yeah, we got that return on the app.py function for the index route. All right, let's continue on here, you guys.
Now, do I actually render this template so that the user sees it when it's time to log in? Well, I think this is fairly straightforward. If I go back to app.py, I can create another route down here, app.route, quote unquote, /login. Then I can create a function called, for instance, login, to keep it simple. And then I can simply do render template, quote unquote, login.html. Now, I could go manually to /login to access that page, but let's make this template a little more user-friendly that we began with. Let's actually give the user a link, ahref equals, quote unquote, /login, and then inside of that anchor tag, login, period. Otherwise, let's proactively do this, ahref, quote unquote, log out, and then inside of that anchor tag, log out. That is backwards. So let's do it correctly this time. Here, we're going to say log out if the user is logged in. Down here, we're going to say log in if the user is logged out. So I think now it's consistent with the English I already had earlier. Let's go back to the original URL, whereby it says you are not logged in, but it now gives me a link to log in. If I hover over that, super tiny, but in the bottom of my screen, I will see that it's going to the /login route. And indeed, if I click on that, I find myself at the first, well, the 10th of many errors today. So let's go back into VS Code. Let's open up my terminal window, click on the one that's running Flask, and the view function for login did not return a valid response. The function either returned none or ended without a return statement. So user error on my part. Let's scroll down, and sure enough, I did something dumb. I need to return the return value of render template. All right, let's hide that. Let's go back. Let's click reload. enter, and now we see the login form. Of course, it doesn't do anything useful. If I type in David and click login, it goes to the login route, but it's saying method not allowed because I haven't done anything yet with post. That's fine too. Let's go back to my login route, and let's do this. If the requests method equals post, the implication being the human clicked the login button after typing in their name, then let's do this. Session, then in square brackets, name equals request.form.get quote unquote name. And then we will, let's say, return redirect quote unquote slash. So what's going on here? If the user indeed submitted the login form using a request method of post, which is implicit because that is the method I'm using in login.html, thereby allowing me to distinguish between whether the user just visited the form or they submitted the form. If I go back to app.py, I am, in the case of submitting the form, going to store in a special global variable, which I imported up here on line 1, a key called name, and I'm going to set the value of that key equal to whatever the human's name actually is. Now, as an aside, I'm not bothering with error checking now, so it's possible to just click the button and not type in a name. But imagine from Frosh IMs, we could borrow some of that if not logic to make sure that the human gave us a valid name. But the point here is that this special global variable that I've now imported and enabled by way of these lines of code here is essentially giving me a global variable that's in its essence a global dictionary in which I can store any key value pairs. The first key I'm storing is name. The first value I'm storing is the human's actual name. And what I can now do, more interestingly, is this. When it comes to displaying the default page, which recall is index.html, recall that I was checking, is there a name being passed in? Well, there can be. Instead of just rendering the template index.html, let's pass in the user's actual name by using session.get quote unquote name. And here too, I'm using a feature of this session global variable whereby it too, like request.args and request.form, comes with a get method built in that allows me to get the value of that specific key. And as an aside, if there is no such value, it will at least return none, capital N in Python, which is similar in spirit to null, but unrelated to memory. But it's a special value that indicates, there was no such name. But so long as I'm using this logic in index.html, checking if there is a name, that's either going to be a valid name or blank or missing. In either case, I will display the user's name, I think. So if I've done everything correct here, which I haven't, but I caught myself this time, I did one last thing on line 20. If the user has submitted the form via post, and per line 19, I've remembered in my session that they're logged in. That's sort of equivalent to stamping their hand, storing their name in the session, effectively remembering who they are. The last thing I'm going to do is redirect the user back to slash. Why? Well, think about most any website you log into. If you try to visit a page and you're not logged in, you log in, hit enter, and you're usually redirected back to like the home page or the default page. How can you do that? Well, slash represents the default home page, so I just need to import one more feature of Flask, the redirect function. So I'm going to add that to my comma-separated list on line 1, and that gives me the ability to send, if you recall from last week, one of those 301 status codes or 300 something that tells the browser that the website has moved to this other location, for instance, from this to this other one. All right, let me go back now to the browser here.
Okay.
Let me click back to the main page such that I'm told you are not logged in. Let me click on login. Let me type in my name, crossing my fingers, enter, and now, oh, darn it, I'm still getting method not allowed. But this is something we've seen before. That's just because I'm trying to use the login route for both get and post. So I think I need to add methods equals quote unquote get and quote unquote post, just as with Frosh IMs. And now if I go back and I try to resubmit this form and click continue, now you are logged in as David, period. There's still a bug, or really a missing feature. If I click log out, I go to /logout, which is not found at all, but that's just because that route doesn't exist. That's fine. Let me go back to VS Code here. Let me create one final route, app.route, quote unquote, /logout, And then in this route, let's define a function called logout to keep it simple. And in here, I just need to clear the session. I need to clear off the hand stamp from the user so as to tell them stop sending me this cookie. And so we can actually do a function called session.clear, which clears the contents of the session. And then I can go ahead and return redirect, quote unquote, slash, so that once you log out, you're just sent back to the home page again. So if I try this again over here, 404, let me go back to where I was. Let me click log out now. And notice I'm still at slash, but I'm no longer logged in. I can do it again all day long. Type in David, log in, click log out. I can log in now as Yulia, log in. Now she is logged in, and now she's logged out. And even though I keep saying slash, recall that browsers are typically just in the habit of hiding values that don't really need to be there all the time. So if you see nothing after the TLD in the URL, it's implied that you're visiting slash, the default page. All right. So with that said, what we've just introduced then is this idea of a session whereby, because of how HTTP works and because of how cookies can be sent back and forth from browsers and servers, and because Flask is used by so many people, they've implemented all of the functionality for us to keep track of those cookies and reading them and figuring out who is who. What's nice about the session global variable is that you can implement one web application, and if you want to store something in memory for a specific user, you can store it in the session dictionary instead of in a global variable, instead of in a database. So if you want to keep track of who is logged in on a per browser basis, you use session. If by contrast you were to use a global variable like registrants, like we did a little bit ago, every user of your website would have access to that memory, which you don't want. So session is sort of like a per user variable, and you don't have to know or care how it's implemented, but being in CS50, you know now that that session abstraction, that per user global variable, is really implemented under the hood, because Flask is opening that virtual envelope, looking for the set cookie and the cookie headers back and forth, and taking care of all of that to ensure that you can just use session as we intended on a per user basis. All right, so let's go ahead and implement another application that also implements a very common feature using sessions, but this time to implement full-fledged shopping carts. For instance, if you want to implement a bookstore online via which people can add books to their shopping cart. Well, let's see where to begin. In advance, I've created this folder called store, and inside of it, I've got a few files: app.py, requirements.txt, store.db, which is new, and templates. And inside of templates is the usual index.html and layout.html. Let me go ahead and use SQLite to open store.db. Let me go ahead and maximize my terminal window and simply do a .schema to see what's inside here. Seems that there's a single table in store.db called books that has two columns. One is an ID, which will be a unique identifier, aka primary key, the other of which is title. If I want to select star from books, I can see all of them. And in this database, there's only 5, sort of 5 of my favorite books, if you will. All right, so now that we know that we have that database, can we go about implementing our own version of Amazon, if you will, our own shopping cart to buy these books? Let's go ahead and open up requirements.txt. And as before, let's also include as a dependency flask-session, even though it's already installed on the server. But if you use this application anywhere else, you'll need to install that too via pip. Now let's go ahead and open up app.py, close my terminal, and let's add some of those same features up here. Let's import as well redirect, as well as request, as well as session. Let's, above that, go ahead and import from CS50 the SQL feature, as we've used earlier. And let's also import from Flask session the feature called session, capital S. Then down here, let's proactively connect to the database with the SQL function specifying SQLite : / store.db. Let's then configure sessions as before with app.config, quote unquote, session _ permanent equals false. Then let's specify app.config, quote unquote, session type equals, quote unquote, file system, all lowercase. And then lastly, to enable sessions, session passing in app, essentially wrapping the web application with this session functionality. Now let's do something simple, a very simple template that just spits out all of the books. So let's define a route for slash. The function therein shall be called index as before. Inside of that function, let's do this. Create a variable called books, set it equal to db.execute, quote unquote, select star from books, to keep it simple. And then let's return render template, passing in the template books.html, which I'll create momentarily, and passing in those books, as we've done many times now, with a key and a value as a named parameter. OK, let me open my terminal. Let me open up a file in templates called books.html so that I can create now this template. And this one will be relatively short but dynamic in that we're going to do the following. Let's extend layout.html as we keep doing. Let us then define a block called body as always, end the block down here. And inside of this block, let's do this. How about a nice big H1 that says books to list what's in the catalog? Then let's do this. For each book in the books parameter that was passed into this template, and proactively I'll do N4 down here, let's go ahead and output, how about each of the book's titles. So how might I do this? Well, let's go ahead and maybe start like we did earlier with a UL tag down over here.
He's so fast.
And inside of this, let's do a bunch of LIs. Where inside of the LI, I'm going to go ahead and do the books.title to spit out its title. All right. Now I'm going to go back to my terminal window. And as before, I'm going to do Flask run, having previously stopped the other instance of Flask in my other tab. Enter.
All right, we got to catch up here. Jeez. For book in books, using Jinja syntax, we can use Python loops. Right, we're going to create a line item for that book dot title. Right. And then we're going to end the for loop. Right, so in Jinja syntax, you have to end the for to show that it's over. And then here we'll put a end block. Okay, let's go back to what he was at earlier. There we go. In app.py, index, def index does books is equal to database.execute, quote select. So we're going to use SQL syntax here, select all from books. So we're just going to select everything from the books database. So the SQL has a books database as SQLite / store.db. Let's do create a file here called store.db. Even though we don't have anything in here, it's fine. And then we're going to return the render template on books.html. Okay. And books, we kind of pass in the variable books is equal to books. So we're going to pass in that variable on render template to render out with this the variable books so that we can put in and loop over all the books in the book, every book in the books variable, right? Yeah, they're using SQLite here. Hey, welcome back, Baseman14. Appreciate you for joining me again. How's it going? Welcome back in. How you doing?
My terminal. Let me open up a file in templates called books.html so that I can create now this template. And this one will be relatively short. Down over. And as before, I'm going to do Flask run, having previously stopped the other instance of Flask in my other tab.
Okay, what's it going to look like?
And now I'm going to go ahead and open up the application as open.
Okay, let's predict here what's it going to look like. Without having seen it, let's try to see if we can visually predict, and that'll help us learn, right? So what we're doing is we are creating a session, right, so that we are enabling the sessions, the session variable, which allows us to be able to, he had uppercased it there. Is it supposed to be uppercased? Let me see. Flask session. Yeah. Okay, so that's fine. So then, right, then we're pulling from a database and saving the information in a variable called database. We're calling an execute on that database selecting all the books from it and saving that in a variable called books. We are going to then return a call to the rendered template of books HTML, passing in a variable with it of books equal to a books variable called, which houses the variable of books information here. Okay, so what's going to happen is then on books.html, we're going to have a books header in h1. We're going to have an unordered list, so we're going to have bullet points, and we're going to have a list item, which will be the book title for every book that is in our database. So that's what it'll look like. It'll be an unordered list, so a bullet pointed list of book titles.
And when I hit reload, we should see no longer our login application, but store. And sure enough, there is a very simple, if unuseful, book store that just lists all of the titles therein. All right, well, let's make this more interesting now. Let's actually enable the user to add things to their cart. We can do the user interface in a bunch of different ways, but let me propose that we do this. Instead of a UL tag, let's do an actual form. So let's actually do, how about this? For each book in books, let's go ahead and output an actual usable form for every book. Even though this is not necessarily the only way to do it, it's perhaps the simplest to start with. For this book, let's go ahead and output an h2 tag with its title. So book.title. And then down here, let's do a form for this book. Form action equals, quote unquote, cart, which I'll claim is a route we'll implement in a moment. The method I want to use for privacy's sake is going to be post for this form. Now I'm going to go ahead and include a button whose type is submit, and the value of that button is going to be add to cart. And now I need to actually specify what I want to send to the server so that it knows what book to add to the cart. So I can do this, for instance, input name equals title of the book, the value of which is, quote unquote, the book's title as before. And the type of this box could be text. Now, let me go over to the store tab again. Let me hit reload. And if I haven't messed up, I think I should, if ugly, have for each book an input that shows its title and a button that will allow me to submit that title to the server. Now, this is silly because I already have the book's title here, and it certainly shouldn't be the case that I can change the title of a book to add it to my cart. So I don't think I want an input of type text. So there's another way I can do this. I can actually make those inputs hidden by changing the input's type.
Okay, so I got to catch up here. Geez. Type equals, quote, hidden. Right. Form, import, and block button, add to cart. Okay, so we're creating an input, a form which has an input, which is type hidden, for add, and then it'll add to cart, add that item for that book. Okay.
From text to hidden. Now, if I go back to that tab and click reload, I still have the buttons, and underneath the hood, I still have the book's titles, such that when I click add to cart, the book's title will be sent to the server. But this too is a little sloppy, because recall that the database that we're using, if I cd in my other tab into the bookstore and do SQLite of store.db and do select star from books, recall that I have for each book not only a title, but also a unique identifier. And this is good because even though this database is small, what if two books have the same title? That's definitely the case in the real world, but they might have different authors. And they definitely have different IDs. So much better practice than sending a string of text is to use what we learned in our week on SQL, use the primary key to uniquely identify these books. And so by this I mean, let's change our template here to pass in not a hidden title, but a hidden ID, so that what's actually going to be submitted is the number 1 or 2 or 3 on up. So if now I go back to that other tab and reload, visually nothing has changed, but notice if I right click or control click, view page source, I indeed have a bunch of forms on this page, but notice this form will submit value 1 to the server. This form will submit value 2. This form will submit value 3. This is exactly how websites like Amazon and the like work, such that when you click Add to Cart, your browser is sending a unique identifier for that book or whatever it is to the server. And the server is then saving that ID in its database or its session or somewhere else to remember what book or item is in your cart. So we too can do that. Let me go back to VS Code and let me go into app.py and let's add a bit more logic that's going to allow me to add those numbers to my cart. Well, what is the cart going to be? Well, we have to implement a route for this. So let's define app.route, quote unquote, /cart. And then down here, let's define a function called cart. And then in here, let's do a couple of things. Let's first say if request.method equals post, the implication of which is the user clicked a button to submit a form. Then let's go ahead and get the ID from that form. I'm going to get request.form.get quote unquote ID. Now, just to keep myself sane, I'm going to call it book_ID, just so I know it's a book's ID and not some other identifier here in Python. As always, I'm going to do some error checking. If the book ID exists, then I'm going to add that book ID to the shopping cart in my session by appending it to that cart. Now, what's going on here? I'm assuming at the moment that there's already a shopping cart in my session. What is the type of that cart? Well, because I'm using append, which we have used in the past, it's a method that allows you to append a value to a list of items. Yep. Turns out, I'm assuming at the moment that my shopping cart underneath the hood is implemented as a simple Python list. But to do that, I need to make sure it exists. I don't want this to be some global variable. I just need in my route to check that the cart exists for this person. So what I'm going to do is this. If the cart key does not exist in this user's session, then let's go ahead and create a shopping cart for this user in their session that equals an empty list. And again, you can think of a session as a global variable for this specific user. And it's Flask that handles all the cookie stuff to make sure that abstraction works. But the very first time someone accesses your shopping cart and tries to put something in it, it literally won't exist because the session itself is completely empty. But I can put a key in there, the value of which is an empty list, and then subsequently I can add anything I want to that list, just as I'm doing with this append function down here. Once now something has been added to the shopping cart, let's return the user by redirecting them to their shopping cart. Otherwise, if the request method is not post and it's get, which is to say the user just visited the cart, let's show them the contents of their cart. Let's create a variable called books, set it equal to db.execute, quote unquote, select star from books, where, and here's where we can use more SQL skills, the ID of the book is in this list of IDs, using a placeholder and parentheses to make clear in SQL that I want to check if it's in a list of values, much like we talked about nested queries in week 7. But what list of values do I want to pass in? Well, that's easy. Session, quote unquote, cart. Pass in the list that I've called cart to which I've been appending all of these IDs.
Gotcha.
And once I have those books, and recall that db_execute returns a list of dictionaries, I can return render template of quote unquote cart.html, passing in those books as the value of that named parameter. And so if I now want to actually see what is in that cart, we need just one more template. So let me open my terminal window. Let me exit out of SQLite. Let me go into my templates folder and create a cart.html template. Hide my terminal window, extends layout.html, close quote, and %, then block body as always, then down here end block as always, and then in here let's do something super simple. H1 for cart to make clear this is your shopping cart and not the catalog of books. Let's do an ordered list just so we can see the order in which things were insorted. And now we'll do for book in books, and inside of this Jinja for loop and for, let's go ahead and specify a list item of that book's title. And again, you can use different syntax in Jinja. You can do book.title, or you can do book quote unquote title, indexing into it in that way. But I'll use slightly simpler syntax as we've been doing for a while. All right. if I've now made no mistakes, which is low probability, let's reload the application itself. The cart, now, we now see the same catalog of books. Let me proactively go to /cart in my URL up top and hit enter, and you'll see that my cart is empty at the moment. But because of all of the logic I've added to my cart route, watch what happens if we add these to the cart. Let's try adding the very first book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Click. All right, I screwed up here. I did get redirected to cart, but that method is not allowed. We know I'm using post because that is what was in my form, but I think this is an easy fix. If I'm using method equals post here, I need to support that route here, so I need to specify the methods I want to support are indeed not just get, but also post for my cart route. All right, let's go back again, back to the catalog, and click Add to Cart. Aha. Not only has it been added to the session, I've been redirected to /cart, and because it's in my session, there is the first book. Let me hit back now. Let's add the last book to the cart, Mostly Harmless. Click. And now I have those two books in my cart. Now, to be clear, these are only stored in the session. They're not yet stored in a database, so this isn't like the user has placed an order. It's more like they have added something indeed to their shopping cart temporarily. And in fact, you can kind of see what's been going on all this time as follows. If I cd back to my store directory, and let me clear the terminal, and type ls, notice this other folder magically appeared called Flask Session. And in fact, if I look inside of Flask Session, you'll see it turns out a couple of files now. Because I've been using this for some time, I've created 2 sessions over time, and I essentially have 2 cookie values stored in this folder that's keeping track of what the user has been doing on my website. In short, these files that are stored temporarily in that folder are the result of having configured the session as follows: to use a file system-based session, so that Flask is creating these files for you and storing in those files as much information as it needs to remember what is in whose cart. And it uses cookies, ultimately, to main that kind of state. All right, I think we have time for one final set of examples whereby we'll connect all. All right, I think we have needs to remember what is in what is placed the main post, because that is what.
And we need just the end block. Okay.
All right, I think we have time for one final set of examples whereby we'll connect all of the dots too from week 6 and week 7 together in a final implementation of an application. Let's do this. Let me close all these tabs here. Let me open my terminal window. Let me hit Control-C on Flask and go into now our final example called shows. And in my shows directory, which I created in advance, I have similar files, but not the same: app.py and requirements.txt, shows.db, which is our old.
Okay, let's quickly get this lined up, organized. Is there a command to quit all these at once? That'd be nice. Login, store. Okay, so we have app.py. Probably need all of these. We'll probably have to change this guy up to a different database. Probably going to use all these same ones. We'll change this. And we'll change this. Okay, that. Requirements, those. This is going to be rename shows dot database, and then in templates we can delete, and then here. All right. Did he have a thing for index? Hold on. What's his index look like? Oh, index just routes you to the books. Okay. Okay. It shows here. Okay, let's continue on.
And the type thing. What if we introduce to them? All right, I think we have time for week 6 and week 7 together in a final implementation of an application. Let's do this. Let me close all these tabs here. Let me open my terminal window. Let me hit Control-C on Flask and go into now our final example called shows. And in my shows directory, which I created in advance, I have similar files, but not the same, app.py and requirements.txt, shows.db, which is our old friend from SQL, wherein we have thousands of TV shows from IMDb, as well as my templates folder, which as before has index.html and layout.html as well. What I'm going to do now, though, is go ahead and introduce that much bigger database and make an application that's going to let us search IMDb, albeit with a simpler UI than at imdb.com. So how might I do this? Well, let's go ahead and implement app.py first. Let me open up app.py and hide my terminal. And from this list of from this starting point, let's do this. Add to it from CS50 import SQL. And down here, let's go ahead and create a connection to that there database. db equals SQL, quote unquote, SQLite, // shows.db. Now, I'm going to go ahead and create a route. App.route, quote unquote, / for my default, define an index function. And this function's purpose in life, quite simply, is to return render template of, quote unquote, index.html. Now, what's that route actually going to do? Well, that index.html is going to be very simply a search form. So let's implement that. Let me open my terminal and go into templates and then open up index.html, which has the starting point of our body as before. And in here, let's do this. Form action equals, quote unquote, /search, which will be the next route that I implement. The method I'll use now is get, just to make clear what's going back and forth between the browser and server. Let's create, as we have in the past, an input with autocomplete equaling off, autofocus on for this field. The name of this field will be Q, just like our Google example from last time. The placeholder for which will be query for Q. And the type of this, just to make it slightly better, is search, which is almost the same as text, but it usually gives you a little X you can click to clear the search box. Then I'm going to have a button, the type of which is submit, and the label on that button will be search. And that's it for that form. Now, this isn't fully functional yet, but let's test it out. Let's go back to my terminal window, back to my shows folder, run Flask run in this one after making sure that it's not running in my other tab. And in my other tab, too, I'm going to go into my shows folder, but only in one of these am I going to run Flask run. All right, I'm going to go back now to my other tab, which still shows my shopping cart. I'm going to shorten the URL to just / and hit enter. And now we see my shows application. Of course, if I search for something like The Office, enter, nothing actually happens. Why? Because even though the browser brought me to /search $Q equals Office, there's no search route yet. So let's go back to VS Code. And in VS Code, let's go back to app.py and implement that route. Okay. Now in this route, I'm going to go ahead and in app.py, I'm going to create app.route, quote unquote, /search. So creating the route is super easy. Define a function called search or whatever. And then now, let's go ahead and search for titles that match what the user typed in. So shows equals db.execute, quote unquote, select star from shows where the title equals question mark as my placeholder. Let's now pass in request.args.get, quote unquote, q, which is the query that the human typed into the form. I could create a variable, but it's a short enough line of code, it fits on the screen. I'm going to leave it as that. Then I'm going to return render template, quote unquote, search.html, comma, and let's pass these shows into this template. Shows equals shows. Now I don't have a search.html template yet, so let's go and create that. In search.html, I just want to print out those titles. So let me go into my terminal window, specifically the one not running Flask. Let me cd into templates, and then let me go ahead and run code of search.html. Template. Now I don't have, and let's leave it as
request get a format get queue return temp.
Then I'm going to return render template, quote unquote, search.html, comma, and let's pass these shows into this template. Shows equals shows. Now I don't have a search.html template yet, so let's go and create that. In search.html, I just want to print out those titles. So let me go into my terminal window, specifically the one not running Flask. Let me cd into templates, and then let me go ahead and run code of search.html. Hide my terminal and really quickly do an extends, quote unquote, layout.html. Then let me do a block body. Then let me do an end block, as always. And in here, let's just do a simple unordered list of these titles of shows. For show in shows, where shows is the variable I passed in as my named parameter. And let's end that for loop. Then inside of here, a list item passing in show.title as my value to interpolate. All right, let's see what happens now. Let me go back to my other tab, back to the form itself. Let's search for office, search, nothing. So no actual results on the page. In fact, if I view page source by right-clicking or control-clicking, notice that I've got a UL, but no list items. All right, well, technically the show is not called Office, but The Office. So let me do that. The Office, search. Oh, we actually have a bunch of versions of The Office, which we saw. Not only the American one, but the British one and others as well. So it seems that my equal sign in my SQL query is behaving exactly as we learned in week 7, whereby I'm literally searching for a specific title that I'm plugging in for that placeholder. So I think we can improve this slightly. Recall that you can make things a little more flexible by not using equals, but we could actually use like. Unfortunately, we need to, when using like, use those wildcard characters like a % to the left and or right of the thing that we want to match on. So the easiest way to do this might actually be this. Let me create a new variable here called query and set it equal to, sure, request.args.get quote unquote q. However, let me actually prepend to that a % to be my wildcard. And I'm going to use plus, which recall is the concatenation operator in Python. Alternatively, we could use an F string or some other technique. But to be pedantic, I'm going to literally add to this string another % at the end as well as the beginning there. So if I type in office, this will just construct a Python string or str that's %, O-F-F-I-C-E, %. These percents have nothing to do with Jinja's templates. They have everything to do with SQL per week 7, which are wildcard characters.
Yeah.
Then over here, I can plug in not the raw value that the human typed in, but I can pass in that query so that it is placed where the question mark is, and it is properly escaped to avoid any SQL injection attacks.
Could we not just
so
use
now let's go back to my other tab and
on
hit
either
back.
side of the question mark?
Instead of searching for the office, let's search for office. Click. Now I get back not only all of those offices, but also every TV show that has ever had the word O-F-F-I-C-E in it or a substring thereof. So maybe overkill, maybe not what I want, but it did in fact make the search a little more versatile. But it turns out we can improve upon even this user interface. But notice up until now, what we've really been doing now is combining Python and SQL and HTML and, well, no CSS, and everything's quite ugly for it. But we've combined almost everything. What if we introduced to the mix a little bit of JavaScript code as well, whereby I could move away from this model where every time I want the browser to talk to the server, I don't necessarily need to send data from browser to server and then reload the whole page, perhaps at a new URL. Much like our autocomplete example at the end of week 8, recall that we could populate the body of the web page, the DOM, or document object model, using JavaScript as well. So in fact, even though we haven't done this yet, I bet I could write a little bit of JavaScript code that talks to the server and says, give me more results, and just displays them instantly in the existing web page without having to generate everything server-side. In other words, you can actually use JavaScript to generate some code client side as well. So let's see how this might look. I'm going to go ahead now and implement in this next example the following. So let me propose to tweak our implementation of index.html such that it still has a form, but it additionally has some JavaScript code that goes and fetches from the server any book titles that match what the human has typed in, rather than have any submit button at all that sends the whole form to the server and lets the server generate all of the HTML together. Let's instead do a little more client side. So I'm going to go into index.html here, and inside of this template, I'm going to change the way this form here is implemented, and I'm going to simplify it as follows. I'm going to get rid of all of this traditional form, and I'm just going to give myself inside of the block's body an input type for which autocomplete as before is off, which is auto-focused as before, whose placeholder is still quote-unquote query, whose type is actually search. What I'm not going to bother doing, though, is giving this thing a name, because I don't intend to submit this form to the server per se. I just need a form field that I can use JavaScript to grab the value from. What I'm next going to do is create, weirdly, an empty unordered list with nothing in it. But I'm going to fill it dynamically with JavaScript ultimately. In fact, here comes a script tag, as we saw at the end of last week, whereby inside of the script tag I can write some actual JavaScript code. And this is going to look a little cryptic at first, but I'll walk us through it as follows. First, let me create a variable called input in JavaScript and set it equal to document.querySelector, quote-unquote input. This code will grab from the web page's DOM, or document object model, that is the tree that's been built up in the computer's memory, the tag of type input. So this will give me JavaScript access to this here HTML tag.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to listen to that input for any keystrokes. And I'm going to say input dot add event listener. And I'm going to listen for the input event, which just means I've inputted a keystroke. So I'm not caring about key down or key up. I'm just saying when something's been inputted, go ahead and call this function. So I'm going to use a slightly new feature today that's called async, which means what's about to happen is going to be asynchronous for reasons we'll soon see. Inside of this function, I'm going to now do the following. I'm going to create another variable called response and set it equal to the result of waiting for a function in JavaScript called fetch that will know how to request via HTTP a specific route, specifically /search, q equals, and then some value that I'm going to append. And what I'm going to append is the value of that input box. In other words, this line of code is going to make an HTTP request from JavaScript to the server requesting /search q equals office, or whatever I've typed in. But I'm therefore using code to simulate and induce an actual HTTP request without the human actually clicking submit. After that, I'm going to say let show using code from specific route, specifically /search q equals, and then some value that I'm going to append. And what I'm going to append is the value of that input box. In other words, this line of code is going to make an HTTP request from JavaScript to the server requesting /search q equals office, or whatever I've typed in. But I'm therefore using code to simulate and induce an actual HTTP request without the human actually clicking submit. After that, I'm going to say let shows equals await response.text, which just means wait for a moment until I get back the text of this HTTP response in JavaScript. And then I'm going to do document.querySelector, quote-unquote UL. I'm going to fix my capitalization. And I'm going to change the inner HTML of that UL element, as we did once last week, to be equal to whatever the text in that variable is. In other words, these lines of code do the following. This line of code listens for human input in that text box. This line 13 makes an HTTP request from JavaScript to the...
Okay, so this line listens for human input via the input HTML element using add event listener. Okay.
In that text box, this line 13 makes an HTTP request from JavaScript to the server asking for /search $q equals something, where the something is whatever the human typed in. Line 14 waits for the response from the server. Line 15 uses the
Server in the form of
do the following. This line of code listens for human input in that text box. This line 13 makes an HTTP request from JavaScript to the server asking for /search $q equals something, where the something is whatever the human typed in. Line 14 waits for the response from the server. Line 15 uses the response and plugs it into the inner HTML of the UL element, effectively putting a whole bunch of li tags therein. Unfortunately, search as a route does not quite do what we need just yet. So I'm actually going to go back into app.py here, and I'm going to modify the behavior of app.py such that it behaves as what we generally call an API, an application programming interface, which is a way of standardizing how you provide input to a service and get output therefrom. The API here is going to be super simple. All I'm going to do now is this. I'm going to go ahead and search for provide input behavior of app.py such that it behaves as what we generally call an API, an application programming interface, which is a way of standardizing how you provide input to a service and get output therefrom. The API here is going to be super simple. All I'm going to do now is this. I'm going to go ahead and search for, as before, some shows in the database we generally call an API, and plugs it into the inner HTML of the UL element, effectively putting a whole bunch of li tags therein. Unfortunately, search as a route does not quite do what we need just yet. So I'm actually going to go back into app.py here, and I'm going to modify the behavior of app.py such that it behaves as what we generally call an API, an application programming interface, which is a way of standardizing how you provide input to a service and get output therefrom. The API here is going to be super simple. All I'm going to do now is this. I'm going to go ahead and search for, as before, some shows in the database, as I've done here. And what I'm then going to do is actually render the same template, search.html. But now that I've confirmed that that part itself doesn't need to change, I am going to change the template. In search.html, instead of sending a proper UL tag, which I don't need, I'm just going to send a whole bunch of li elements instead. A snippet of HTML, if you will.
Well, this not shows as a search.
Now, I'm definitely going to change. I am going to change the template. In search.html, instead of sending a proper UL tag, which I don't need, I'm just going to send a whole bunch of li elements instead. A snippet of HTML, if you will. Now, I'm definitely going to cross my fingers this time. I'm going to go back to shows here and click back. I'm going to reload the form, and that still works. But notice I indeed got rid of the button. I didn't bother using a submit button. Why? Because when I type in OFFICE, what I want to have happen underneath the hood is autocomplete. I want to get back every result that says Office. Now, what just happened? Well, let me actually go into the developer tools of Chrome. Let me go into the network tab, and let me actually start over. Let me click the reload button here. Let me clear my log here. And notice last time I specifically clicked on doc because I only want to get the top level document requests. Today I'm going to click all so I can see even these JavaScript based HTTP calls. And very simply I'm going to type in O. It indeed takes a moment, but notice in the logs here of my network tab, I can see the request that was sent from JavaScript to the server. If I click on that, you can see in this query here, and it's a big one, so we're seeing a little spin. Under the response tab, I don't have a fully formed web page. I have a whole bunch of li tags, and the titles of those shows in there, hundreds of them, if not thousands of them, which is why it was a bit slow, whereby the server generated not a full-fledged web page, but just a snippet of HTML instead. And so this is an example of, indeed, what's really an API, albeit a naive one, that's just returning a minimal amount of HTML that you need to populate your own unordered list. But
my question is, you guys, for those that might know, if you guys remember when we talked about SQL, is that he gave that example of where you could perform some sort of like render or export on the actual database schema to speed up the process, but that essentially like locks all the values as is, and you can't really add more values from there without reverting back to the original form. Is that correct? Now, would doing that, if this shows database at that point in time is, not being appended or what, having, dynamically having dynamism into it, then could we perform that SQL render on the database schema to basically speed up that autocomplete calls? Let me know.
generally speaking, not a full-fledged web page, but just a snippet of HTML instead. And so this is an example of, indeed, what's really an API, albeit a naive one, that's just returning a minimal amount of HTML that you need to populate your own unordered list. But generally speaking, this isn't really the best way to do this. Really, when it comes to APIs, you should be not sending back snippets of HTML, but really the raw data. And so, in fact, very common in the world of APIs is to use something called JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. Bit of a mouthful, but what it means is that instead of sending back all of that HTML, what you should probably send back is really the equivalent of a Python dictionary. JavaScript doesn't have dictionaries per se. JavaScript has what the world calls objects, but for our purposes here, they are the same. And in fact, what you see on the slide here is a snippet of JavaScript object notation that wonderfully happens to be the same format that we use in Python for dictionaries. Kind of a coincidence, but probably deliberate. But finally, things are looking the same. And in fact, if I select all of the columns from my shows table in that database, I'll get back not just the titles, but the IDs of the shows, the year in which they started, as well as the number of episodes. So in VS Code, I'm going to first go up to the very top and import one last feature from Flask, namely a function called JSONify, which, as the name kind of suggests, it's going to turn into JSON anything you pass into it. So for instance, if I pass to it a list, I'm going to get back a JSON version of that list. If I pass in a list of dictionaries, I'm going to get back a JSON version of a list of dictionaries. In short, it converts whatever is in Python's memory to the corresponding JavaScript object notation. So let me scroll down now to my search route, and let's make a change as follows. Let's go into the last line, and instead of rendering a whole template of HTML, let's actually return the return value of JSONify, passing in all of those shows. Though for good measure, let's actually fix a couple of other things as well. If, for instance, the user did not actually type something in, we probably don't want to search blindly for some value we know is empty. So let's actually tweak even this part as follows. I'm going to go into my search route further, and I'm going to define query equals request.args.get, quote unquote, queue. But then I'm going to ask a question. If there is, in fact, a value for that query, then let's go ahead and query the database for that query, but prepend to it a % first, plus the query itself, plus a % after, close parenthesis. Else, if there is no query, that is, they didn't type in anything at all, then let's go ahead and specify that the shows list is really empty. There's no results, so that at least when it comes time to JSONify that variable, we're JSONifying either an actual result, set of results or nothing at all, but consciously so. And just to speed things up too, instead of selecting thousands of shows that might contain the letter O, let's limit this to like the top 50, just to speed things up, even though in the real world you'd probably want all of them. All right, with that said, let's now go back into our index.html, which previously was expecting back a snippet of HTML that might contain the letter O. Let's limit this to like the top 50, just to speed things up, even though in the real world you'd probably want all of them. All right, with that said, let's now go back into our index.html, which previously was expecting back a snippet of HTML, namely all of those li tags. But let's change it now to actually expect a proper JSON response. In fact, to do so, what I'm going to do is a couple of things. One, I'm going to tell my JavaScript code on line 14 is tell JavaScript to treat that response indeed as JSON and not text. Because what I don't want is a big string. What I really want in the browser's memory is a proper array of objects. That is to say, a proper list of dictionaries in the browser's memory. But after that, I don't want to just blindly plug that code into the inner HTML of the UL. Rather, I want to build up my HTML myself. So I'm going to do this as follows. I'm going to create with let another JavaScript variable called HTML and set it equal to quote unquote. I could use double quotes, but I'm using single quotes for parity with JavaScript conventions. But it's just an empty string at this point. Then I'm going to say in a for loop in JavaScript for let show of shows. And this is going to be my way of iterating now over all of those shows. The of preposition is a little weird in JavaScript, but this allows me to iterate over each of the objects in that array. So let's go ahead and do this. Let me go ahead and append to that HTML string with plus equals or concatenate a li tag of my own making, followed by that show's title, followed by a close li tag of my own making. And then outside of that for loop, let's do document.querySelector quote unquote UL to get access to that same empty UL element that we do still have and change its inner HTML not to be what came back from the server, but my own dynamically generated HTML instead.
Man, he's really going off here. So document dot selector UL, and we change the dot inner HTML to equal the HTML that we've been given. Okay.
Now, as an aside, I should note that it's possible that this code might be a little buggy because if the show's title contains any special characters like the less than sign or certain other characters that have special meaning in HTML, things might very well break. And I should probably replace any such characters with their corresponding HTML entities. For now, I'm going to wave my hand at that just to keep the code relatively simple, but to know that we might need to do that kind of escaping of the strings we're pasting in. Let me now go back to my browser here. Let me reload the page so I get the latest version of the code, and let me go ahead and type something like O for office. And there we have it, an unordered list generated not by the server, but by me client side, such that now I can search for O or office or anything else, and all of that is happening now by generating the list items for that UL within the browser itself. And in fact, if I reload here and open up my developer tools again via inspect and go to the network tab, and search for O, I can click on that row, and under the response tab, I can see that I'm not getting back any HTML per se. I'm getting back JSON, albeit pretty printed here. And in fact, that then reveals to me that indeed I'm getting back JSON, and I'm plugging it in to the browser accordingly. So all that said, it seems that now we have the ability, using HTML and CSS and JavaScript, with a bit of Python, with a bit of SQL, can we build full-fledged web applications that increasingly are being used not just on our desktops and laptops, but also on our phones as well. In fact, using all of these languages, can you build a back-end and a front-end that communicate with each other to build things like your own freshman intramural website, your own Problems at 9, or we hope your own final project. That's it for CS50. We will see you back in Sanders Theater one more time.
Woohoo! Everybody give it a thumbs up, pat on the backs all over, guys. Smash a like on the stream if you guys are here. We got 14 of you guys in here watching along with me, so make sure, let's get a thumbs up from all 14 of you guys on the stream right here, right now. Thank you guys so much. I really, really appreciate it. It really helps out to keep new people, shuffling in here and growing the channel little by little. We're almost creeping up on 2,000 subscribers, so thank you guys so much for supporting me. But I'll be here to honestly support you guys as well, day in and day out, as we study together, teaching ourselves, computer science and programming My name is Michael. I'm 26 years old. I have a degree in human biology and a minor in chemistry, and I work as a formulation chemist for a biotech company where I've been working there for 3 years, a little over 3 years since I graduated college, and it's been a great time. I'm a scientist too, or a mid-level chemist at that company, and it's been a good time so far. But I'm just teaching myself Python and more specifically computer science, just because I have a sheer raw passion, pause for computer science and wanting to learn more. Being a physical scientist, I think it's really, really incredible that we've taken these physical elements and been able to manipulate them in certain ways to produce computers. So crazy in my opinion, and that's kind of the goal of the stream. So if that sounds like something that you're also interested in, consider following along to the channel and subscribing here. I really enjoy, meeting new people on the stream and talking with you guys day in and day out, and keep growing a community here. So that marked the end of Harvard CS50X Lecture 9 on Flask. Woohoo! Nice. That was a long one. That was a 3-hour, 3-part watch along lecture. Jeez Louise, but a ton of information. Getting into Flask, setting up Flask, making get and put post requests, setting up the front end to correlate with the back end over like 5 examples of almost pretty not detailed but fairly straightforward applications actually that do both a front end and a back end. So it's quite crazy that in that 3 hours how much we were able to pull out of it and extract. But there was a lot missing in terms of just actual density to these subject matters. It was very surface level, and so we are going to need to put in some time and effort into actually getting a more full-fledged grasp on these topics, and really trying to understand how to uh, get data rather than just like a simple one-liner or something out of a single input. Like I wonder like what happens if we're trying to like fill out mass amounts of data. Like how complicated will it get if we're requesting like in our personal project for the user to give back 5 or 6 different types of information via a form submission. And I mean it'd probably be similar, just start to stack up and making sure and saving those valuables and getting those valuables in certain variables and doing having the script work that way. So I'm quite excited to intertwine that into the script itself. I think today I'm not going to stream for too long today. We did a really long one yesterday and I stayed up pretty late last night, so I am pretty tired today. I wanted to finish this lecture and then just kind of talk over this and then show you guys some of the refactoring and organization I did on the personal project, the small business manager. And then we'll probably call it quit there for today, and then I'll do some personal investigating on more on Flask and research, and then tomorrow we'll come back and get some real hands-on practice with trying to maybe develop some sort of front end for the small business manager, and maybe make a whole stream session dedicated to getting some live coding like on a project and really working on it there. We will also be diving into the week 9 problem set for CS50X. Obviously you guys know there is a problem set at the end of the week, so we'll probably take a day break for tomorrow and not do CS50 tomorrow. Just do working on the project and doing reading out of the book, and then we'll come back on March 6th and do the week 9 problem set on March 6th. So tune back in March 6th for that one. But let's go ahead and take a peek at the small business manager. I on my lunch break I had some time here and I went ahead and kind of organized the code a little bit, not into its own files because unfortunately it would just require a lot of work, and I'm not really wanting to do it because it starts to really break stuff when I start to move stuff into other files, just because I'm losing out on some of these variables that I'm having here, and it can get messy. I don't know, but I so what I did was I organized it into sections here. So I have process functions. So these functions are process functions used to load and exit the system. So you have start menu, the main menu, and the confirm exit, right, to leave. Then you have these are the inventory menu functions. So these functions relate to the inventory. So inventory, add item menu. So this is the menu that goes to display. This is the actual function to add the individual item. This is to edit the item. This is to edit more features, the view, a different type of view. This is the run view inventory. So this would be like a filter menu, and then this would be the actual display of the item. And then the item search, right, for the specific items. So then we have a next category here of transactions menu. So I just have the two transactions functions. So run transactions, which is just a menu for the transactions, and then the transact item, which is just to do the transaction itself. I have another function called expense, another section for expenses, right? It just houses all the expenses from the menu itself to adding categories and methods to adding an expense itself to editing and finding it to searching it up, yada, yada, yada. And then we have a settings menu, or settings section here where these functions relate to the settings menu within the main menu. So you obviously have the settings menu itself, the edit item sizing, um, right? So this is the within the inventory settings and the business settings and the expense settings thereof. Um, then we have some operational functions. So these functions are operational slash helper functions used in the overall system. So we have some visual ones which create terminal and create menu and display some expenses formatted. I'll probably reformat this into refactor this into the actual class itself for a display. We have file IO functions for saving and loading. We have currency conversions for dollars to cents and vice versa. We have information setter function. So this is like the get expense number, get set name, set cost, or set expense, set item number. All those kind of setter functions are found within here for just getting the user input and then we're sending back that input back to do something with it. So yeah, that's how I've reorganized this down. So I'll go through these functions kind of one by one, little by little over the course of the next few days and populate in here some doc strings to actually describe what's kind of going on in the function. I kind of started it up at the beginning for some of these, like the start menu has a doc string here, the main menu has one, the confirm exit has one here, the inventory does, and then I think we stop there. The run and edit does, and then we stop there. So we have we'll keep chipping away at it section by section. I'll try to complete the doc strings for this section either tonight or tomorrow. But yeah, that was really good, and I really am really excited to try to put an attempt together for using Flask and developing using HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and Flask and Python together and SQL to create. And maybe once I get a working version 1.0 in the terminal, we can kind of refactor down from a blank slate and have kind of this be our template. But then really, I think it'll move quite quickly to actually develop a front end application version of it. I think it'll be a good opportunity because we'll be kind of using it ourselves as a tutorial, right? We'll be capitalizing, oh my God, compounding upon our current project even further rather than kind of watching other people's tutorials and just kind of mimicking what's going on the screen. I feel like I'll learn a lot better by converting my current ideas into that new idea via a 2.0 or whatever. So Magnet says, what's X after CS50X? By the way, I think this was a briefly mentioned in the Discord if I remember. Yeah, so after CS50X, I obviously want to continue like learning and interacting with the front end and back end of things because that just doesn't go away in the terms of the modern society. A lot of tech companies today work with front end, back end user interfaces and via storefronts and whatnot. So that's not going to go away. That's just that's just economics and the market how it is. But there are a lot of other applications in terms of mathematics I would like to dive into deeper and into computer architecture and software design in general. So I'm really curious to how actual like big package software is actually developed in terms of maybe operating systems or just products rather than just I really want to know how like these big projects actually are put together and how that all works in terms of hundreds of lines of hundreds of thousands of lines of code in one thing with lots of different things interacting. I think it's really fascinating to how these things start to scale up quite quickly, and the potential that it has. So really, we're just scratching the surface here. And so after the CS50X course, we're going to dive into a lot more like math based. So we're going to take some math courses, refresh our calculus, get in some linear algebra and discrete mathematics, software design in terms of the actual like big ticket package software and understanding how it all works together. Hopefully, maybe getting some books on those, and then computer architecture and hardware and seeing how you know operating systems interact with the hardware at a core level. Maybe diving into understanding assembly and seeing what's going on under the hood there. Not getting like too deep. Like obviously we can go as deep as we want. Pause, but um, you know. I do want to know what's going on. Because if I do get placed into a job, or I do have the opportunity to be employed, or by a tech company or as a developer, then I want to be prepared. I don't want to go in there and have to be a crutch that people will have to pick up the slack for. Coming from a non-CS degree perspective, I want to come in there and be able to actually contribute and understand what's going on. Yeah, there will be a learning curve and training obviously going on in any profession really, but I just want to set myself up for the best opportunity, and I want to be ready when that opportunity comes. So we're just going to keep grinding away here little by little. I really appreciate you guys joining me this evening. This one was a little bit shorter today. I know we only did hour and 45 minutes. I kind of feel bad. It's only 8:30, but I just do have some other stuff I'm going to take care of with editing some videos. I'm potentially going to record another Python crash course, um, try it yourself problem for the channel. But what do you guys, should we do something else before we sign off here? Anything you guys want to see? I've always kind of wanted to learn about that kind of stuff as well. I've heard AWS be thrown around a lot. I've never actually dived into it myself. Yeah, some people in the chat yesterday were mentioning AWS and those lines, but I've never really understood what it actually does and taken a look into it yet. AJ says, yeah, interpreter language is a bit tricky because you have to keep in mind the order things are interpreted. Yeah, in referring to when I was sorting out my stuff into different files. Yeah, exactly. I was losing my global variables and they were being imported directly as blank when they weren't waiting for their functions to take place. And I just was having some trouble and things weren't breaking. So I thought I'd maybe just organize it a little bit better into the main file here. And, that's that. So, but have you heard of Byte Go? I know they have a lot of videos on how companies create large scale applications. Byte Go. Magnet, do you mind throwing some links or resources in the Discord? So they don't get lost. I'd love to reference back to the Byte Go that you mentioned here and take a peek at that. Like I said, I'm really interested in understanding how big package software is actually developed with mass amounts of teams and tested and whatnot. So I just think that that's so fascinating to figure out how people have developed these ways of thinking and developing. Sweet. I'll look forward to checking that out. Should we watch a video on the stream here before we sign off? Let's see. Byte Go.
Today, we're diving deep into the cornerstone of system design, scalability. In a world where any app can go viral overnight, it's critical that our systems can handle sudden traffic surges without breaking a sweat. So how do we build applications that stay rock solid under pressure? Let's find out. First thing first, what exactly is scalability? At its core, a system is scalable if it can handle increased loads by adding resources without compromising performance. But there's another layer to this. Scalability isn't just about handling more work, it's about doing so efficiently. It's about applying a cost-effective strategy to extend a system's capability. This shifts our focus from merely surviving increased demand to optimizing how we scale. This raises some critical questions. If we add more processors or servers, how do we coordinate the work between them? Will the overhead of coordination eat into the performance gains we're aiming for? It's essential to consider these factors to ensure that adding resources actually delivers the benefits we expect. When we talk about scalability, it's more meaningful to compare systems rather than labeling them as simply scalable or not scalable. One effective way to do this is by analyzing response versus demand curves. Imagine a graph where the x-axis represents demand and the y-axis represents response time. A more scalable system will have a curve that rises less steeply as demand increases. This visual comparison helps us objectively assess the scalability of different systems. Now, it's important to acknowledge that no system is infinitely scalable. Every system has its limits, and eventually, demand will outstrip resource availability.
Yeah.
This tipping point often appears as a knee in the response versus demand curve, where performance starts to degrade rapidly. Our goal in system design is to push this knee as far to the right as possible, delaying that performance drop-off for as long as we can. So, what typically causes scaling bottlenecks? There are two main culprits: centralized components and high latency operations. A centralized component, like a single database server handling all transactions, creates a hard upper limit on how many requests our system can handle simultaneously. High latency operations, such as time-consuming data processing tasks, can drag down the overall response time, no matter how many resources we throw at the
Quadratic
problem.
functions.
However, sometimes centralized components are necessary due
Hey,
to
Sadima,
business
how's it
or
going?
technical constraints. In such cases,
Another
we need
channel
to
I highly
find
recommend
ways
is
to
Code
mitigate
Aesthetic.
the impact,
I'll have to check
such as
them out.
optimizing the performance, implementing caching strategies, or using replication to distribute the load. Alright, so how do we build systems that scale well? Let's focus on three key principles: statelessness, loose coupling, and asynchronous processing. First up, statelessness. This means that servers don't hold on to client-specific data between requests. By keeping servers stateless, we make it easy to scale horizontally because any server can handle any request. Plus, it enhances fault tolerance since there's no crucial state that could be lost if a server goes down. However, it's important to note that some applications require maintaining state, such as user sessions in web applications. In these cases, we can externalize the state to a distributed cache or database. This allows the web servers to remain stateless while the state is preserved.
Okay, so your servers then basically act as like a buffer essentially. I don't know if buffer is a better word, but your stateless servers, so that any one server can perform any one action. So any request that comes in just has to find the nearest available server, and then that can pass on the request. Now, if the request requires state storage, like cookie sessions, like we talked about in the CS50X course, then Sadima says, I'm a front-end developer enthusiast. Is this a paid course? No, the CS50X course is a completely free course. It has a paid option that is, honestly, in my opinion, please do not, I highly suggest you do not pay for it. There's no actual merit, insigniated with the certificate. So it has all the same content. There's just a paid certificate versus a free one that actually doesn't have any actual application for getting a job or merit. So just do the free one. It's about understanding the knowledge and information anyways. So that's truly the value in the course, is the information inside. There is no difference between the paid or free. So just do the free alongside me. We're just currently watching a video of scalability from a magnet that he suggested, or just a channel he suggested regarding this. And this is tying in exactly to what we talked about in CS50X in week 9 on Flask, where we're talking about server interactions and state storage. So this is actually helping us solidify that information. This is a really good suggestion. Thank you so much, Magnet. Appreciate you here. Right, we have these servers, so any one server can perform any sort of request. They have flexibility that way. But if state storage is required via cookies or user state, then we have an external state storage cache that we can then pull from and request external for that specific purpose. Okay.
Next, loose coupling. This is all about designing
Charlie
system
L, welcome in,
components
dude.
that
How's it
can
going? If you
operate
guys are here, make sure to leave a thumbs up on the
minimal
channel.
dependencies
Subscribe
on
along. I
each
really
other.
like hanging out with you
By
guys.
using well-defined interfaces or APIs for communication, we can modify or replace individual components without causing ripple effects throughout the system.
Shout out
This
Choppy for the
modularity
super
is
chat
important
earlier.
for scalability because
Shout
it
out
allows
Choppy.
us to scale
Hearts up for
specific parts
Choppy.
of the system based on their unique demands. For example, if one microservice becomes a bottleneck, we can scale out just that service without affecting the rest of the system. Lastly, asynchronous processing. Instead of having services call each other directly and wait for a response, which can create bottlenecks, we can use event-driven architecture. Services communicate by emitting and listening for events, allowing for non-blocking operations and more flexible interactions. This approach helps mitigate tight coupling and reduces the risk of cascading failures in complex systems. However, asynchronous processing can introduce complexity in error handling, debugging, and maintaining data consistency, So it's crucial to design these systems carefully. When it comes to scaling strategies, we have two main options: vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. Vertical scaling, or scaling up, involves increasing the capacity of a single machine. This could mean upgrading to a larger server with more CPU, RAM, or storage. It's straightforward and can be effective for applications with specific requirements or when simplicity is a priority. For example, vertical scaling might be preferable for database systems that are challenging to distribute horizontally due to consistency constraints. However, vertical scaling has physical and economic limitations. We can only make a machine so powerful, and costs can skyrocket as we approach the upper limits of hardware capabilities. Horizontal scaling, or scaling out, involves adding more machines to share the workload. Instead of one super powerful server, we have multiple servers working in parallel. This approach is particularly effective for cloud-native applications and offers better fault tolerance. It's often more cost-effective for large-scale systems, as we can add or remove resources based on current demand. However, horizontal scaling introduces challenges like data consistency, increased network overhead, and the complexity of managing distributed systems. Now, let's get into some concrete techniques for building scalable systems. First, load balancing. Think of load balancers as the traffic hub of a system, directing incoming requests to the servers best equipped to handle them. Without load balancing, we might have one server overwhelmed with requests, while others sit idle. Load balancers can use various algorithms like round-robin, least connections, or performance-based methods to distribute traffic efficiently. Next up, caching. Caching is like giving our system short-term memory boost by storing frequently accessed data closer to where it's needed, whether that's on the client side, server side, or in a distributed cache. We can significantly reduce latency and decrease the load on our backend systems. Implementing a content delivery network can also offload traffic and improve response times for users globally. As our data grows, sharding becomes essential. Sharding involves splitting large datasets into smaller, more
Sharding? What?
manageable pieces, each stored on different servers. This allows for parallel data processing and distributing workload across multiple machines. The key is to choose the right sharding strategy and keys based on the data access patterns to ensure even distribution and minimal cross-shard queries. Carefully selecting shard keys helps avoid hotspots where some shards become overloaded while others are underutilized. A golden rule in scalability: avoid centralized resources whenever possible. Centralized components become bottlenecks under heavy load. Instead, think distributed. If we need a queue, consider using multiple queues to spread the processing load. For long-running tasks, break them into smaller, independent tasks that can be processed in parallel. Design patterns like fan-out, pipes, and filters can help distribute workloads effectively across our system. Finally, embrace modularity in system design. By creating loosely coupled, independent modules that communicate through well-defined interfaces or APIs, we enhance both scalability and maintainability. This modular approach helps us avoid the pitfall of monolithic architectures, where changes in one area can have unintended consequences elsewhere. In a modular system, we can scale, modify, or replace individual components without impacting the entire application. Building a scalable system isn't a set-it-and-forget-it task. It's an ongoing process of monitoring, analyzing, and optimizing. Keep a close eye on key metrics like CPU usage, memory consumption, network bandwidth, response times, and throughput. These metrics are invaluable for identifying bottlenecks and making informed decisions about when and how to scale. As our applications grow and evolve, so too will our scalability requirements. We need to stay flexible and be prepared to adapt our architecture as needed. What works today might not be sufficient tomorrow. We should continually reassess our design decisions and be ready to implement new scalability techniques as our needs change. If you like our videos, you might like our system design newsletter as well. It covers topics and trends in large-scale system design.
Yeah, so it just seems like ways to reduce load, like in terms of, spreading things out and different techniques to do so, and just sharing the processing across different platforms. But at that point, managing costs as well. There's always costs with these economic standpoint, with these in terms of the economic standpoint. This information is overloaded. How could you implement any of these things? Yeah, right. It's a lot. It's just an intro. I just wanted to get like a little bit of an intro here. It's just for fun. We'll get like a book and really dive deeper into system design and get some practical practice with it and like with a book and really go deep into it here. Pause. Make sure you guys hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel here. We are at 1,540 subs, just in that range. So thank you guys truly. We have uploaded the watch along condensed version for the week 4 part 1 of the CS50 X2 2025. So I record the lectures that we do those live streams on, and I post just watch alongs of condensed versions for those. So be sure to check that out as well, guys. Yeah, it's not very in-depth, but it's nice for service level understanding. And its goals. Yeah. Goals one day, right? We're setting some goals. All right. Let's see here. What say ye? Where are we at in this book? 415. What's the next heading? I already talked about division method. I already talked about that. I already talked about linear probing. No, I think I'm here. Linear probing. Not doing this today. We'll do that tomorrow. We are slacking though in our reading. We got to keep moving. We have been slacking in the reading. That's for sure. We need to get to. We're on page 417, and we need to get to the end of this chapter. Is oh boy, it just keeps going. 10. Oh my gosh. Here. 450. So we got like another 40 pages to go here. Dang. That's a lot on hashing alone. But it seems like hashing is a really key concept to understand. Like he even in that video mentioned that that's how they, organize their, system design through complex hashing and stuff. So it's definitely something I've got to really get knowledgeable about. But I'm gonna go ahead and call it here for today, you guys. We streamed over 2 hours today. I really appreciate you guys joining me. Please leave a like on the stream if you were here and enjoyed. It just does. It doesn't do a lot, in terms of actual display, but it does do a lot in terms of helping our channel and keeping YouTube, promoting us, and getting new members into the stream and networking with everybody. You can join the Discord link down in the below as well, where I have access to all of my resources from PDF versions of the books to personal notes and weekly updates for my problem sets and projects in the CS50 courses and whatnot. I really appreciate you guys joining me here. Sorry for the little bit of a shorter one. We did a over 4 hour stream yesterday on a Monday, so it was quite the long stream for a weekday. So I'm just gonna cut it a little bit earlier here today so I can get some dinner and probably just do some editing and then go to bed early. And then we'll be back tomorrow to continue on with our studies here. So please, if you guys have suggestions for courses you would like us to take and you guys are wanting to take and maybe are wanting to take alongside someone else and maybe myself, suggest them in the Discord. I'm considering things to do after we complete the CS50X course. We're currently about to finish week 9, so and then we'll have 1 week left after that, which is pretty much just our final project week. So thank you guys so much for being here. Truly subscribe and follow along. Shout out to Choppy for the dono today. He hit us with a super chat, so big shout out to Choppy. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye, guys. Thank you.